Welcome to the Events Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Taylor, and each week I talk with event entrepreneurs about how they plan, promote, and run their events. We help you build your events empire by growing your business using live events. Whether you're running community meetups, conferences, trade shows, IT training, music events, or literally any type of event, we focus on finding actionable tips that you can use straight away. The podcast is sponsored by Apps Events. We produce over 300 of our own events across the globe every year, from training to conferences, and we're now sharing our expertise to a small group of event professionals. There's a couple of ways we can help you. Firstly, we can run the logistics for your event. We have a whole support team who can handle all the heavy lifting for you. We can help set up your website and agenda, liaise with your speakers, deal with the huge volume of questions you'll get from attendees. We can liaise with venues, and we can come to the event to actually run it for you on the ground. Get in touch with James at appsevents.com and we'll jump on a call to see if we can help. Secondly, I offer one-on-one coaching to help event entrepreneurs grow their events. I want you to get more attendees, produce epic events, make more money, and most importantly, to do it all with no stress. So just email me at dan@appsevents.com and we'll jump on a call. And now, on to the interview. Hello, welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Michael Kruppe. I've just learned how to pronounce his name, and he's the general manager of the Shanghai New Exhibition Center. So going to learn a bit about what it's like living and working in China and running events. So welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning to you.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd love to find out, because you were just saying you've been in China 20 years. Is that right? Over 20 years?
It's actually 30 years now. It's my 31st year.
Wow. So that's just really interesting because, I know a lot of people who've spent some time in China, but not many who've really, made their kind of careers there. So this is really, really interesting for me. So I guess to start off with, how did you end up going to China in the first place? How did it all come about?
Well, my first company was a trading company from my hometown, Hamburg in Germany. They sent me to China that time. To be honest, I was not very happy because my plan was going west. So more like, US and this kind of cool countries. Back in the 80s, honestly, China was not really considered to be a cool country. And then, over the decades, as we all know, that changed. And I must tell you, the first time I touched down here, that time even no direct flights were possible. I had to fly via Hong Kong. So touching down, I kind of really fell in love with the country, with the people, with the food, especially with the food, because I really can say if I would not have liked that food that much, I would have not made so many friends. And, with friends, you make business and so on, connections.
Sure.
So that's actually what happened, yeah.
And what were you like, when you said trading company, what were you trading and whereabouts in China were you working?
Well, the early days, I was based in Shanghai and Beijing. So my first 15 years I spent on, or in the chemical industry. I was sourcing, selling and buying mainly food chemicals. So I was buying raw materials for big food producers in Europe and vice versa. I was also selling European food products to China.
Now, how was going back 30 years, what was it like? I'm curious what it was like in Shanghai. I mean, everyone says about Shanghai, you go back after 3 years and you don't recognize it because things change so much with the growth. So
right.
What was it? Was it like, was there many foreigners? And I know there was a couple of areas where a lot of the expats live. Were you in one of these kind of areas, or did it even exist back then?
Correct. No, again, and this is changing over time. So there were definitely just a few number of foreigners, and there were only a few designed areas, hotels where you could stay. And one of them was the Peace Hotel, quite famous hotel where they have the oldest jazz band in the world playing. I think when I came that time, the guys were 60 years old. I think some of them still playing today. No. It was like whoever knows China or big cities here nowadays, big cities have these flyovers, highways, crossing each other. That time, Shanghai, Beijing, they had one major street and they had lights or street lights on. All the smaller streets that time even had no lights.
Wow. Is the old, the old part of Shanghai, was that kind of a place people lived and hung out, or was that really kind of a bit run down in those days?
Absolutely. What people or Westerners call French Concession or People's Square, let's say these were the areas, and by the Bund, these were the areas where people were living, companies were set up. Honestly, if you wanted to meet for a drink as a foreigner, the only place to go was a bar in the hotel. There was no street life, basically, for Westerners, no Western restaurants. I remember that time, even just getting an orange juice or forget about, German black bread as I like it, or sausages, coffee, all these kind of things, which is quite normal today in a world where Starbucks, McDonald's is here everywhere. 30 years ago, it was almost not available, and it was really tough to get a decent food, a Western food.
Yeah. Now, so I guess in those early days, did the company get you an apartment, or you were just living in a hotel the whole time?
Yeah, just a hotel. Apartments technically were not available for foreigners.
Right. And so how did that transition? Like you spent quite a long time doing this job, did you? Or what was kind of a transition in your career?
Yeah, very roughly, I started with that company in '86, then going China '89, worked for them until 2001, I think it was. And then, over time, when China opened up, Western companies came in more and more. And then you also got in the focus of so-called headhunters. And then that actually what happened to me. And then over time, I changed. I got more job offers. And the latest was 7 years ago, now as a CEO or GM of the exhibition center here, which is meanwhile, in terms of occupancy rate, the number one in the world.
Yeah, now that's interesting. Obviously, it's the events podcast, and you can. I don't know. You popped up in some conversation on LinkedIn, and I saw you were running this exhibition center. Now, I like I was mentioning before we started talking, I haven't spent much time in China. I mean, my company, Apps Events, we're a Google partner in this, and Google isn't in China. So, but we run a lot of events in kind of Chinese, what China would consider China, I guess, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau. But not in China. Now, I know these exhibition centers. I mean, there's a few big trade shows I hear about. There's Global Sources. I think there's one in Hong Kong, and there's another one in Shenzhen, I think. And I know that this is kind of the only big exhibitions I really know in China, and these are where people go to kind of buy. All the Western buyers go to purchase all different products, and they have different weeks. They have different things. Like, are you running these kind of, is there something similar that you run in Shanghai, one of these kind of sourcing events, or multiple ones?
Well, I'm running here an exhibition venue. We are 300,000 square meters large, 20 exhibition halls, which makes us not the biggest one in the world, but as I mentioned before, the most successful one.
Yeah.
I'm running one of these. So we have a couple of world-leading exhibitions like the China Furniture. We had the Huawei conference, the Chinese mobile communication. We had the GSMA Congress. We had CES Las Vegas, Consumer Electronics Show. We have a couple of really world-leading exhibitions here. Last year, 8 million visitors. And it's a very interesting job because over the year, we have something like 120, 130 shows from almost every possible industry. And that makes you, as a venue owner, very close, or you are very close to the organizers, to the big company CEOs. You meet them, you have a chat. So that gives you a very good insight in many industries around the world.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in things definitely from the point of view of people running the events, because that's what I do. And I'm fascinated by trade shows and exhibitions because I've never run one. Now, if somebody was looking to kind of come and run an exhibition in China, maybe a foreign company or a small organization, do you have to set up like a Chinese company, or can you run like an event in Shanghai as a foreign organization, or do they have to come in and set up a local presence in China to do something like that?
Where the law just changed, I think just 6 months ago. Technically, as a foreign company, you can set up your own so-called WOFE, wholly owned foreign enterprise, or 100% foreign owned. And technically, you could be very smart to do that. You need local partners, you need the network. In the end, you have to sell something. In this case, you sell square meters to exhibitors or to visitors.
Yep.
And you cannot do this without a Chinese partner. And that's something we already, as a venue owner, we have like the Las Vegas CES Consumer. We recommended them 5 years ago, a local partner. In the beginning, they were a little bit nervous, being an American association, work with a local Chinese partner, but that went very well. And then 1 or 2 years later, that show became very hot here in our venue.
So do you like help, like let's say a foreign company wants to run, do you help put them in touch sometimes with local partners so they can go and run a successful event there?
We are helping them. Let's say we don't do this business ourselves. We have a kind of principle. We are in an independent exhibition venue, and that means we are totally neutral. We only could recommend partners, but in the end, our customers, our suppliers, they're deciding themselves. And that goes for other areas like logistics, catering, F&B, and so on. We want to stay independent.
Right. So you don't provide all the catering. There's third-party catering, and you recommend some options for people, and they organize that.
Correct. And same goes for logistics. Let me just mention that because logistics is a highly sensitive area. There are some venues in the world who own their own catering or their own logistics. And that may work in other parts of the world. In China, we tried it. It did not work. So basically, there's a cake to share. And this, maybe you heard about this yin and yang. So the kind of balance thing you have to observe here very strictly in China. When I realized I was touching in somebody else's cake, I decided not to go deeper because everybody has to live, everybody have to make business.
Yeah.
So we stick to our expertise, and that's running an exhibition venue.
Right. So when you say logistics, are you talking about like having the workers to do the setup and stuff? People have to, they use third-party companies for that, like for setting up the booths and things like that.
Exactly. And it does not only go in setting up the booth, they are also in our industry, a lot of design companies. So they design booths specifically made for special furniture, electronic, whatever show it is. This is also very interesting business. Technically, we could do that. I mean, basically, I know all the data of all the exhibitors. We have every year 120,000 exhibitors. I could say, okay, I know them all. I do it myself. But that's not how it works. So back to your point, we let people live and let die, or what's that? What James Bond said in one of his movies. Right. It really pays off if you know how to balance the business here, especially in this part of the world.
Now, and have you seen, like, over the years, have you seen foreigners come in and actually run very successful, very profitable events? I mean, is it something reasonable that you can pull off as a foreigner to come and run an exhibition in China?
You can. I don't know them all, of course, but I would say the ones I know, and I'm here again a long time, I would say 99% of them are doing it with a local partner.
Yeah, sure. What type of the visitors? Is it? Do you get foreign visitors, or is it almost all local visitors, or does it obviously depend on the show?
Well, in a normal year, Dan, with let's say plus minus 8 million visitors, I would say we have probably 90% Chinese visitors and 10% international. Now, in years like these, no need to mention the corona in detail, but countries are blocked or there's a travel ban. No foreigners can come in or out. This year will be totally different. So we all hope, of course, that the travel ban will be over soon. I guess this year, as I mentioned before, 3 weeks ago, we started our exhibitions again. When I walk around my venue, I can count the foreigners on one hand, honestly. Yeah. So it's pretty sad, but we are still very busy because luckily China is a very big market. And if the sales director from a company from Paris, New York, or wherever cannot come, most of the companies, they have a Chinese association or a Chinese partner, or even 100% so-called WOFI, whole-owned foreign enterprise. So they send their local staff. So these companies are represented not by a foreign face, but via a domestic face, and that's good enough as well.
Right. Now, in fact, the coronavirus, definitely want to talk about that because it's now, we're recording this July the 20th and kind of things are going a little bit back to normal. I want to just go back to like, how did this all start for you? Because obviously, this it originated in China, in Wuhan province. And what, I'm not sure how I think that's quite a long way from you, but how did the shutdown come? And did you have to cancel events, or what was the kind of, when did you first hear about it, and what was your reaction?
That official information, I think, came on January 26th, just days before the first day of the Chinese New Year. That's the basically Chinese Christmas for a Western world, let's say, where, well, in this part of the world, 700 to 800 million people are traveling, going home to their provinces. Now, on that day, the government made an official announcement, you may say a force majeure, that it's not allowed to hold any public events due to a new virus, which came out. And that was a day when from one day to the other, we had to shut down our venue. And logically, we had to shut down any event, any exhibition, any conference and whatsoever, not only here in my venue, all over China, and later on, as we know, all over the world.
And did you have like events actually running at the time, or did you have events coming up? Like what was happening at the time when it happened?
Yeah, good point. Actually, it's luckily it was a bit different from 2003 when we had the SARS, which you may remember. That time I was actually in Guangzhou. At that time it was happening during a show, but this time it just happened during the Chinese New Year. So let's say luckily everything was already closed down because of the Chinese New Year,
Yeah.
but everything was prepared to reopen around February 9th, I think it was. And that time government announced that the official Chinese New Year was prolonged for 2 weeks.
Right. And so how many shows did you have to cancel? How many exhibitions were actually canceled then?
Well, the official toll is now 43. 43 exhibitions in my venue had to be cancelled.
Wow. Okay. And what those organizers are they planning to run them again later in this year, or they hold off and hoping for next year? Like what? Oh, is it a combination?
Well, that's first of all, it's a huge puzzle because the situation changed from getting better and getting worse, not on a daily basis, but probably on a weekly basis. So, a show organizer who said, "Okay, let's postpone it until the virus is over," and maybe they remembered the SARS, which was finished in 2 or 3 months. They were hoping, okay, the March show was cancelled. Let's try to do it in May, for example. Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, we are already a very successful venue. That means our occupancy rate is 75%. So for that canceled show, not necessarily we had a free time slot available. So that was the first problem. And then the second problem was that in between, situation deteriorated. So they changed, let's say, to June, and then they canceled June again. And then when things got better, they tried to do it again in September. It was, and it's still a huge puzzle. We have sorted out things for most of the rest of 2020, but some shows who could not find a time slot here, they either totally canceled, or some of them, and totally 10, they went to other venues here in China.
Right. Now, and what's happening now? Because I saw you actually were running an event the other weeks. Can you talk me through how the kind of slow reopening started, and what happened, and what the new protocols were?
Yeah. So almost since day one, after that official announcement from government came, we were in close contact with, let's say, all the stakeholders, the organizers, the police, public security, fire bureau, government, and so on, to design and to think, if situation gets better and if people can attend exhibitions again, under what condition can that happen? So we were designing drafts on and off, face masks, gloves, sterilization, washing hands, disinfections, UV light, infrared, you name it. And while we were doing that, things looked much better. And I remember that day, April 8, we were here in Shanghai finishing our draft, and we're trying to send it to the local Shanghai government. On that April 8, that night, came an official announcement from the state council, so from the Beijing central government, saying basically, sorry guys, things got worse again. The whole thing is canceled again for another time to come. So that meant everything was in vain. And for another time, which we did not know how long it would last, the central government said no more shows. And that was a huge setback.
Yeah. Right. So what's the current situation then? Like, what are you looking at now?
Well, as surprisingly, that state council note came on April 9 or April 8 that night. On May 9, almost 1 month later, to the opposite, also as a more or less surprise, suddenly state council announced, good news, green light, China can hold exhibitions again. And that time we pulled the draft out of the drawer, sent it back to government, they approved it. And then basically it was almost showtime. I mean, it took us another 3, 4, 5 weeks to get everything ready, prepare, have some rehearsals, because if you rehearse with 1,000 or 2,000 people, it's different from having a show with 100,000 people, for sure. But that what happened. And then in the mid of June, it was for us here in SNIEC in Shanghai showtime again. Our first show was a semiconductor show with just 25,000 visitors. But just last week, we finished the world's largest beauty show, which is called China Beauty. Whole venue covered, and totally 180,000 visitors. coming to the show for 3 days without any problems.
Wow, fantastic. And how many events do you have lined up for the rest of the year then currently?
Yeah, we will have until, and even people are booking now Christmas time. In the normal year, Christmas was a no-no, even here in China, although China doesn't have a Christmas. Now we even booked Christmas and New Year with shows which were canceled from the first half. So the total number is, for the second half, 88 shows.
Wow. Now, what do you think?
By the way, is a lucky number. You probably remember from your short time in China. 8 is a lucky number.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
88 is a lucky number, yeah.
How is it like? I'm curious. I want to talk a bit about like you've worked in the exhibitions industry for a while now. Like, what do you? A few things. First of all, like, do you think a lot of organizers are going to go out of business, bankrupt? I'm not sure how it works. If how much money they could potentially lose if an event's cancelled. I mean, did they get to reschedule again for free? Like, do you think a lot won't survive, or do you think most are will get through it?
Well, that's a black and white question. Then let me answer first for my venue, for SNIEC. Most of our, if not all of the top 20, 30 exhibition organizers are my customers, and all of them had great 5 to 10 years. And if they are smart enough, and I'm sure they were, they managed their finances well enough to even last 1 or 2 years. Now, and that's the same for a venue for us. Well, but to run a show, it's great to have a venue and it's great to have an organizer, but you need exhibitors and visitors.
Yep.
And I'm afraid probably a not small number of exhibitors may get bust or mid-sized, whatever. And if they get bankrupt, well, then who's coming? So it doesn't help us if the venue and the organizers are sound and financially in a good position. The exhibitors has to be. So that's something which has not happened yet in China. But I believe in the next 2 or 3 months, we unfortunately would probably see a not small number of exhibitors in different industries who probably will have problems.
Sure, that's a very good point. And what do you think, like, in terms of the future for exhibitions? I mean, personally, I don't think they're going away, but I think there's going to be a lot of changes in terms of more security, more sanitation, more distancing. Like, what do you see as, like, I guess in the near future, the next few years, in terms of what the changes are going to be for exhibitions?
Well, then that's the key question. We are almost discussing this daily, and I had a meeting with a Chinese friend last week from the exhibition, actually a customer of mine, and he compared that situation with 9/11. And I also remember before 9/11, we were flying pretty much, relaxed. Of course, there were a couple of safety controls, but not as tough as they were after that. And nowadays, we got used to already for the last 15 years going through X-ray and that. I think something similar will happen for the exhibition industry, that people are checked, people go through UV scans, infrared scans, and maybe wearing face masks is a thing for the next 3, 4, 5 years on a daily basis, or inside closed halls or exhibitions and so on. And I guess as we are human beings, we probably will get used to it.
I think, that Asia is further along. I mean, I've been going to Asia my entire work career, and always in Asia, people have sick, they wear face masks. There's a lot of hand sanitizer around. I mean, when you fly into a lot of airports, like I was just in Taiwan before COVID, and there's heat scanners as you go in, and they're taking people's body temperatures. This kind of thing is like kind of normal in Asia, but as it's not normal in Europe. We're very casual about everything in Europe, and so maybe China and Asia is more a little bit, they've had SARS. There's been things that have happened. Maybe people are kind of a bit more adjusted to behaving like this in Asia. I don't know what you think.
Well, my view on that is that, I mean, I'm a Westerner, and I'm live here for 30 years, and I travel very regular to the Western world, 5-6 times a year at least. My private friends, but also business friends, somehow in the Western world, people immediately, when they have to do something like wearing a face mask, they feel controlled by somebody, and they lose their rights of freedom or something like that. Here in Asia, we don't, even me now here living here for so many years, decades, I don't have that loss of freedom thing if I have to do something like wearing a face mask or going through another X-ray again, or have to queue again for a temperature check. I don't feel, deprived of my human rights or something like that. Somehow in Asia, especially in China, people don't think in that, what's the right word, aggressive way of losing freedom, rights, or whatsoever. I think it's just different. We are also discussing this with private friends. in a way, people in the West, they think different about this kind of things.
It's true. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, America's more extreme than Europe, you know, and other areas. Every area is different, you know. But for sure, I you know, in Asia, and you can see, I mean, and China's more extreme than most other countries in Asia in terms of people's mentality for this. So I think it's kind of a spectrum, isn't it? Like probably going from east to west, it gets more relaxed. But cool. So I think to finish things off, I'm just keen to ask a bit about living in Shanghai. You know, I love traveling. I'm always fascinated. And we started off by talking what it was like 30 years ago. You know, I mentioned before, I'm thinking of moving out to Asia with my family because we've just got so much going on there, and I'll be spending time around. And hopefully Google's going to come back to China so I can start running events there. So I'm not holding out any hope of it happening soon, but, you know, in the current situation, but you never know.
Sure.
What's it like? Can you give me a feeling of what it's like now? Obviously, you said before, you know, obviously massive changes. When 30 years ago, there was kind of one hotel everyone used to hang out in. I imagine now there's probably even thousands of places expats hang out in. Like, what's it like? Like from the point of view of a foreigner, for someone like me living there now, like with a family, like what's it like?
Well, I'm still how to say, on a daily basis. I'm still sometimes even surprised, and I'm impressed how the Chinese adapt very fast in general to changing situations.
Yep.
And that includes, and I'll try to make the bridge to consumers. I mean, China with 1.4 billion people, and again, 30 years ago, I think the so-called mid-class was probably below 100 million people, and whatever the monthly income level was that time. Nowadays, China is considered to have a mid-level income level of 400 or 500 million people, so the size of Europe. And one thing is that maybe the Chinese in a way are more curious on new products, new services. They're more spenders. I mean, I'm from Germany. If I look at my friends, even myself, my parents, they put every Deutschmark or euro on the bank account and hoping to get 2 or 3% interest on that, rather than spending. Of course, we were spending, but not as much as people do here. Now, is it good or bad? I don't know. But if I look back to 30 years, I think it's definitely good for the economy and good for the development of this country. So in a way, and I come back to the consumer thing, that is with a fast changing, especially digital world, I don't have to tell you that, then you know that. We have, just in my venue, we have 4, 5, 6 huge digital shows where the latest technologies on 5G and everything is shown, which most of my friends in Germany haven't even heard about.
Yeah.
And that is something, or another thing is like, I think in the old days, the number of applications for patents was very low in China, and usually Germany, America, they were very high. Now one of the highest number of applications for patents is actually held in China. So the number of inventors on using new technologies is, I don't know the exact number, but it's grown massively versus just in Germany. I think in Germany, we are way behind the 5G or any Wi-Fi or digital technology. So, and I think we all know that the next 50, 100, 200 years will be definitely controlled by digital somehow. And if you don't know how to manage such technology, well, you are left behind.
Yeah. So yeah, to come back to my point about just living generally, like how has it changed in terms of a place to live? Like for someone coming in from another country, Shanghai now, is it? I mean, is there a huge amount of foreigners there now, and are they kind of spread around the city?
Well, definitely, and every city, not only Shanghai, they have, well, so-called more foreigner areas or less foreigner areas. So usually foreigners who come from a company, they're living in compounds. And then the company is renting for them some apartments or even some villas, depending on your budget. And that's available all over China, not only in Shanghai. There are certain areas here in Shanghai, of course, where mostly foreigners are living. Well, I'm married to a Chinese. We have kids. At home, we speak Chinese, so we are more living in a Chinese environment. But for a foreigner coming today to Shanghai, everything is here. Restaurants, bar, food, travel, communication. You would not feel that you are in China if you come for the first time and if you think China looks like 20 years ago. Everything is ready, everything is available. So that's definitely a big advantage for a Westerner coming nowadays versus 20, 25 years ago, because that time, as I mentioned, not even coffee, chocolate, or an orange juice was available.
And which are the main? Is there kind of one, or what are the names of the kind of the main areas where the foreigners live? Is it one place or more than one place?
Well, there are a lot of places. I mean, I would probably mention the so-called French Concession,
Yeah.
which is right in the heart of the old Shanghai. Shanghai is split into two parts: Puxi, which is like west of the Pu River, the Huangpu River, and then Pudong. That's where we are, east of the river. Well, the Pudong area 30 years ago was farmland, was swampland.
Yep.
There was nothing. Nowadays, Pudong has 8.5 million inhabitants. So, and the rest of Shanghai, 24, 25 million. So the greater Shanghai area, probably 32 million people. Now, Pudong is considered, meanwhile, at least the financial and commercial downtown of Shanghai. So in the old part of Shanghai, you have the residential, you have the shopping malls, you have, this kind of things. So there's a kind of split, if you want, between the private life and the business life. But for foreigners, definitely most of them, they still would go to the old part of Shanghai, where they have, like this French Concession, more a Western, or it's possible to have a Western lifestyle.
Sure. And I'm curious, was it like, I don't know, how kind of much, is it getting much more like local Chinese people want to hang out with foreigners? I know, I mean, I've only been to China a few times, but if I compare it to like Taiwan, where it's people, there's much, foreigners get to know locals much easier. There's more English spoken, things like that. Is it becoming like that? Because China always seemed much less like that, but is that changing? Is like to kind of, as Chinese have more money and speak more English, are they looking to sort of get to know foreigners, or is it quite separate still?
Absolutely. No, that's changing. I know Taiwan also quite well from my old days. And that, Taiwan was much earlier in terms of mingling with foreigners than here in the mainland. Absolutely. It was more younger people coming in, and of course, more younger students here in China going to universities, maybe working for Western companies and so on. I think almost everybody speaks English now on the streets, especially the younger people. So that makes it easier for both sides to meet each other. And also more and more, I see more and more mixed couples. I mean, like myself, my wife Chinese, I started early already, but more and more younger people, I see mixed couples. People are mingling, and that's great for development of a city. You get the best of both worlds. So it's nice to see, and it also makes it easier for foreigners.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe one more example, just about my kids. They go to the German school. The older one just left. In that German school of my younger daughter, easily 50% of the students, they have mixed parents. So that already shows the trend of that.
Sure. What that's really fascinating. I'm curious, like, to come back to your exhibitions, like what's like, obviously you have one of the biggest exhibition centers in the world. Like, what's a small range? Like, someone, I mean, do you run kind of fairly small events, and what kind of size in terms of visitors or square meters is kind of the lower end of what you do?
Yeah, well, let's say we have 20 halls. Each hall is around 11,500 square meter. So the smallest square meter we would sell is probably a quarter of a hall. So let's say around 2,500, 3,000 square meters.
Yep.
But why we are doing that? Because in the last 5 years, especially here in China, there's a big shift from B2B, business to business, into B2C, business to consumers. We have more so-called confex, conference and exhibitions. And that is quite amazing to see. And these confex or B2B2C or B2C events, in the first year, they're usually smaller. They don't have so much trade traffic. So a classical event starts maybe with 500 to 1,000 people. And we have, at least from our 130 shows, we have now 20 shows, so roughly 15, 20%, which started on a small basis, quarter of a hall, and some of them even going as big as 6 or 7 halls. Yeah. And one good example is a show called Bilibili. Bilibili is a Chinese company. They are active in so-called influencing. So their main product is let people design a short video where you can show yourself that you could be an influencer. And that product is selling as crazy here in China for the mostly younger people. And with that product, they started a show here in SNIEC 3 years ago with 1 hall, and now they have 7 halls. And you say, how is it possible? 120,000 square meter or 130,000 for just 1 product? Yeah, it's crazy. Because this influencer business is growing so fast here in China.
Wow. Look, really fascinating. I guess that the final thing just to mention really quickly is like, obviously the current environment with the rhetoric with the US and China looking like some kind of Cold War, like, do you think that's going to affect the business, or do you think this, I mean, obviously no one knows, who knows what's going to happen, and hopefully things will calm down a little bit, but do you think this might affect foreign companies coming in and running, or what's your opinion on that, as much as you can guess?
Well, I guess it will definitely affect foreign companies, but mostly American companies. Yeah. I predict that the Chinese government will sooner or later open the borders to Asian countries and European countries. But I think they will not open it to the US due to the conflict, let's say. So that would probably mostly favor European or Asian Western companies here in China over US companies. That's already happening right now. And let's hope that there will be a change. But for the time being, that's the situation.
Great. Michael, fascinating to talk to you. Where can people find you online? I've put a link to your LinkedIn profile here. Anything else? Any other links you want to give to people?
No, it's just our normal website, www.SNIEC.net.
Yeah.
So that's SNIEC.net, and that's where you find me. Also as a contact. So there's a link for information or contact request. If people want to do that, contact me there and we will come back to you. I would be gladly discuss with you more than you or your audience about, whatever, exhibitions, China, anything which is of interest.
Fantastic. Michael, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Have a good day.